Welcome, everyone. Today is an introduction to what it means to preach as a lay reader. Whether you have never preached before or whether this is something you've been doing for years, my hope is that this session gives you clarity, focus, and maybe even a renewed sense of purpose in what you're doing. If you feel nervous about preaching, that's completely normal. In fact, it's a good sign. Nerves usually mean that you care and that you recognize the weight of what you are doing, that you don't take this lightly. And the truth is, you may always feel at least a little bit nervous when you preach. That doesn't always go away, and it doesn't need to. It keeps you grounded. The goal here is not to become a polished or impressive speaker. This is about becoming a faithful preacher. So before we begin, let me frame where we're going so you know what to expect. In this session, we will clarify what preaching is and what it is not, ground ourselves in the responsibility and privilege of lay preaching, learn how sermons actually begin, not with writing, but with listening to the text, the Spirit, and the people, and explore how to write a clear, focused, and faithful sermon. By the end of our time together, my hope is that you feel more confident in where to begin, clearer about your role as a preacher, and grounded in what faithful preaching looks like in practice. Let me begin with something that needs to be made clear from the start. The pulpit is not free space. It is not neutral ground. It is not open to whatever we want to say. In the life of the church, the pulpit carries responsibility. It ultimately falls under the care and authority of the bishop, who then confers that to the rector or incumbent, who is responsible for the spiritual teaching, direction, and well-being of a parish. That means they need to know what is being said from the pulpit, whether they are the one preaching or someone else is. So when you preach, you are not acting independently. You are participating in the teaching ministry of the church, under authority and within a shared vision. And what this looks like can differ depending on the context. If your parish has a rector, you are collaborating in their ministry. Your preaching should align with the direction and life of the parish. The rector should be aware of or able to review what you are going to say. You are not offering an alternative voice. You are contributing to a shared one. If your parish does not have clergy, responsibility is shared among the lay readers. You are still not preaching alone. You work alongside the wardens, vestry, and others for accountability and discernment. In both cases, the principle is the same. Preaching is never a solo act. At its heart, then, preaching is a shared ministry. It's a sacred responsibility, and it is a privilege, not a right. No one earns the right to preach, not through years of service, not through education, not through confidence or ability. It is in something that is entrusted to you for the sake of others. And it's important to say this clearly now. Preaching is not about you. It is not about your ideas, your opinions, or your need to speak. It's about your congregation, helping them to hear God's word in a way that gives life, hope, and direction in the middle of real life. So before anything else, it's worth asking yourself honestly, why do I want to preach? So a sermon is not a lecture, a Bible study, or a space for you to share your personal opinions. A sermon is a moment of spiritual formation, a form of pastoral care, and a way of speaking hope into real life. The Sunday service is often the only time in the week when the whole congregation is gathered together and listening in the same moment. That makes it a unique and important opportunity for pastoral care and for shaping the vision and mission of a parish. In ministry training, we often talk about the 3 P's of ministry. Those are preaching, people, and prayer. The Sunday service brings all 3 together, and faithful preaching is a significant part of this. And there is one non-negotiable. Every sermon must offer hope. You might be working with a really difficult passage or something that's really heavy. You might need to name hard truths, but you never leave your people there. You always lead them towards hope, toward the presence of God, and towards possibility, towards life. So at this point, I invite you to pause the video for a discussion question. Think about a sermon that stayed with you. What made it meaningful? So before we write anything, we need to listen. And we listen to three things: the Spirit, the text, and the people. So we're going to begin with listening to the text. So each Sunday, we are given 4 readings from the Revised Common Lectionary. If you're unsure where to find them, you can access them through the website that is on the bottom of the screen now. These 4 readings are not designed to form one neat theme. Often they don't connect at all, and that's intentional. They are meant to expose the church to the breadth and richness of Scripture. They are not meant to be forced together into agreement. So resist the temptation to read them and think that they all must share the same thing. When you try to force a theme across all 4, you're going to lose the depth and integrity of each one. Each text has its own voice, its own history, and its own context. So instead of trying to preach in all 4, choose one text. You're going to read all of them, and then you're going to sit with them and listen carefully to the text. You're going to then choose one, the one that stays with you, unsettles you, draws you in, the one you feel called towards. And remember, only one. From there, you're going to think, what is it about this passage that you feel called to say? And we're going to continue talking about this a little bit later when it comes to listening to the Spirit and listening to your people. What you're not going to try to do is come up with 3 different themes or multiple insights. All you want is one point. So you're going to ask yourself as you're listening to the passage, what is its good news? What is this saying to me? And that is going to be part of your anchor throughout your sermon. Connected to listening to the text is listening to the Spirit. Very often you're going to feel a nudge. You're going to feel a pull towards a particular passage. Something's going to stir, maybe a question's going to arise, a line might even stay with you. So pay attention to that. And even when that happens, and if it doesn't, just pray. Pray for God to show you which passage it is you need to preach on. Notice what's happening within you, what draws your attention, what won't let you go. Somewhere in there, the Spirit is at work. Finally, you're going to listen to the people. You're going to ask yourself what matters in their lives right now. What are they carrying? What are their struggles, their questions, and their hopes? And you don't learn this from a distance, or most importantly, you don't learn it by gossiping. You learn it by being present, staying for coffee hour, having conversations, and being part of the church family. Preaching is not abstract. It is always for real people in a real place. So you've got to ask yourself, what do the people I know need to hear right now? So the first 3 steps of listening to the text, the Spirit, and the people are going to help you sort of narrow your vision down for your sermon. You're going to choose your one text, and then that's going to help you to find the one little tidbit that you're going to preach on. And that will be connected to your people. So at this point, I invite you to pause the video for another discussion question. Which comes most naturally to you, listening to the text, the Spirit, or the people? Which one is the hardest? Once you have listened to the text, the Spirit, and the people, and you've come up with a general idea about what you want to preach on in your text, you're going to turn to research. Now, this matters. You are not expected to do all of this work alone. Preaching is part of a long and living tradition, and we learn from others who have wrestled with these texts before us. But there is a right way to do this. Research is not about letting somebody else tell you what the text means. It is about deepening your own understanding of the text. So whenever you read a scholar's work, a website, a commentary, or another sermon, be thoughtful and discerning. Don't just accept it at face value. You're going to ask yourself, who wrote this? What is their perspective? Does this actually fit the text as I read it? Does this help reveal the good news for my people? A very helpful and trustworthy resource is the Working Preacher website. The URL is on the screen now. It offers thoughtful, well-grounded reflections on the lectionary readings and is a great place to start. You can also read other sermons or use material you find online, but do your best not to copy them. If you do want to use something directly from an online source, don't begin your sermon by announcing where it came from in a way that distracts people. Instead, include sources in the bulletin or weave them in naturally throughout your sermon. Let all the resources you read stretch you, challenge you, and help you to see something new. All of this is coming into conversation with the work that you did listening to help you really build out your idea for your sermon. But remember, just because somebody is a scholar and they write something, you don't have to agree with it. And it does not mean that you were wrong if the both of you disagree. You know your congregation, and your goal is to preach to your people. That's what matters the most. So always keep that at the forefront of your mind. And just briefly, I'd like to make a little note on AI. So there are tools like AI and ChatGPT out there, as we know. Using those to write your sermon is not appropriate. So don't go to ChatGPT and ask it to write a sermon on Psalm 23 for you. That is not your voice, that is not your discernment or your pastoral care. But it can be used well, but only as a tool. So, for example, AI can be used to help you clarify your wording, tighten your structure, check that the main point in your sermon is clear. And this is especially useful if you don't have somebody around to help review your work. So, the principle is very simple. You do the thinking, the praying, and the writing. Tools like AI can refine that, but never replace your work. So once all your work is done, you've listened to the text, the spirit, your people, you've read some commentaries, you've done all this research, and you have an idea, you know what your sermon is going to be about. You can summarize it in your mind in one sentence. And you always are coming back to that question, what is the good news of this passage for my people right now? So once you feel like you're in a good space, and if you get stuck or something is not coming, you know you can always reach out to somebody for help. Your regional deans, priests in your diocese, there's people out there who will help you. But once you're ready to write, that is where we're going to now. How do you write a good sermon? So after all of your work is done, you've listened to the text, the spirit, and the people, you've maybe read a few things online, you've looked at Working Preacher, you now have in your mind an idea, what is your sermon going to be about? And as you're formulating it, don't forget to always come back to the question, what is the good news of this passage for my people right now? And once you're at that point, you have an idea. This leads into writing the sermon. So, one of the things that's really important that needs to be sort of in your mind as you're writing a sermon is clarity. Clarity matters way more than completeness. So, older guidance often suggested that a sermon should be 10 to 12 minutes long, but that is often way too long for how people listen today. A good target is 7 to 10 minutes, which is roughly 900 to 1,000 words. So shorter sermons are not less serious, but they are often clearer, more memorable, easier to follow, and more faithful to spoken communication. People will not retain a long, complex sermon. They will likely get lost somewhere in the middle and they will not be coming back. So they will remember one clear truth that is carried well throughout. So really aim for short, focused, not long. So a sermon typically takes on a very basic shape. This is going to sound familiar to those of you who've taken writing courses. So it starts with an introduction, it has a body, and then it has a conclusion. So in your introduction, this is going to set the stage for where are you going in the sermon. You're going to ground the sermon in your text, you're going to name your focus early, and you're going to draw your people in quickly. At this point, you're going to sort of say, this is the text I'm preaching on. And this is what's the good news in the text. So that's right away. You're going to get your people in from that. What you also want to do is at the start, don't give a long setup or personal story because that's going to delay the point. Just get to the point. What is it you're talking about? So, a really strong, solid introduction will help people immediately orient themselves. They will say to themselves, I see where this is going. That is what you want. If you lose people at the beginning, like I said before, they will not be coming back. They will be bored, and that is not a good thing. A really good thing that can help if you're trying to hook people into your sermon is to use maybe an image, a short video clip, a piece of music. So use them sparingly, otherwise it will get ineffective because people will just be expecting it every time. It needs to be new and fresh, just something to capture people's attention. Once you've kind of told them in your introduction where you are going, you're now going to get into the body of your sermon where you're going to just explain everything. So the body is focused on what does this mean? This is where you're going to explain your passage, interpret what is happening, connect it to real life, and build towards your main point. So think of this as the place in the sermon where you're going to guide people through why you see your point in the text and how it connects to their lives. So you're going to talk a bit about the text, you're going to talk about their lives, and you're going to do it very carefully, step by step. So pretend like you're guiding somebody by the hand through your thought process. How do you see your point in scripture? That's what you're trying to show them. It's not about this long bit of scholarship. Scholarship will lose people if it's not presented properly. Greek and Hebrew will lose people if you don't understand it properly, so try not to use it. If you are not a Greek or Hebrew scholar and you're putting it in, the chances are you're going to misinterpret how the languages work. They are not at all like English. You also run the risk that if somebody is in the congregation and knows those languages and hears you use it wrong, that they're going to be hung up on that for the entire sermon. So your sermon's not going to have any power for them. Don't try to be something you're not. Be who you are. People want to hear your voice. What do you have to say about this passage? Why does it matter to them? That's what they're going to be asking themselves. So don't rush the sermon. Don't overload it with ideas and everything. Like I've said, one point. Keep returning throughout to your central point. And if any bit of information doesn't actually serve your point, then don't include it. Your sermon doesn't have to say everything about a passage. All it needs to do is explain that one point, how you find it in the text, and then bridge that to how you see it being helpful for your community. Finally, you get to your conclusion, and at that point, the question is really, so what? So what is all of this said? What have they been going on about? This is the point in your sermon where you're going to gather everything together. So everything you said is coming back together here. You are not introducing a new point. You're going to restate your main point in fresh language. So say it again, but say it slightly differently. Connect it clearly to daily life. Make sure you leave people with something that's practical that they can understand and see worked out in their lives. And always, like I said, leave people with hope. People need to leave worship feeling hopeful. So a conclusion is not just a summary, but it's a landing place. It's like, this is what I've been talking about for the past 5 minutes. You're going to say it clearly, concisely, and you're going to give people hope. You're going to give them something to take into the week ahead. Your conclusion needs to answer the question, what are people meant to carry when they leave worship? What do they need to keep with them? The final thing to note about the conclusion is that it always opens outward. It always opens, like I mentioned, towards hope, towards God's presence, and towards what comes next. So, a final rule of thumb, if someone remembers only one thing from your sermon, what do you want it to be? That question will shape everything, your structure, your language, and your focus. Repetition is one of the most powerful tools that can be used in preaching, but this is not repetition in a flat or mechanical way. You're not just repeating words, you're reinforcing meaning. So, because people hear differently, you need to say the same truth in different ways. For example, if your main point that is you're connecting throughout your sermon is God is with us in uncertainty, you might say, even when we don't know what comes next, God is still present. In the middle of confusion, God has not stepped away. When the future feels unclear, we are not alone. God is with us. This kind of variation in your theme will help your message land. Remember, a sermon is heard once. People cannot go back and reread it. So your language must guide them. And this is where rhetoric and even artistry matters. Practice your sermon out loud, not to judge how impressive it sounds, but to hear how it feels when spoken. Does it flow? Does it sound natural? Does it carry meaning? That's part of the craft of preaching. So at this point, I'll invite you to pause the video for another discussion question. What do you find the hardest when it comes to writing a sermon? Starting, focusing, or ending? Now let's say that you have finished your sermon. When you get to this point, please know there are always people around willing to help you, to read it, and to offer feedback. If you don't have anyone, AI is a good source for help, but be careful that you don't let it take over writing your sermon. Ask it to give you feedback for refinement, not to fix your entire sermon for you. You need to do the work and ensure your voice is present in the sermon. When it comes to preaching your sermon, try to have it written out. A lot of people assume that the best preachers are those who can do it without a manuscript. However, when you don't have a manuscript, you're more prone to going off on tangents and rambling. You need to remain focused and concise. If you aren't, your sermon will not make sense and you will lose your congregation. It is also good to practice your sermon out loud a couple of times, mainly as noted to hear it. Does it sound good to the ear when you speak it? Where do you normally stumble? Can you change anything to make it better? Often when reading a sermon out loud, you can find issues that you can't find when just reading it off the page. Then when it comes to preaching it, have confidence, do your best. If you mess up, just keep going. Preaching is a learned skill. You won't be perfect. Just keep trying and growing in the art. So to be a lay preacher truly requires humility, prayer, openness, and a willingness to grow. This is not about you, but it is something entrusted to you. And as we said earlier, it is always shared with clergy, with other lay leaders, with the wider church. Ministry is a privilege, it is not your right. So as we conclude, remember, preaching is not about being impressive, being clever, or saying everything, but it is about being faithful, being clear, and offering hope. In this session, we have clarified what preaching is, grounded our responsibility, learned how to listen, explored how to write, and considered how to use resources wisely. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this session has been useful. If you need any feedback or help with specific sermons, you could always reach out to me. My email address is on the screen. I'm more than willing to help when I can. Like I said, preaching takes time to learn. It's a skill, an art, and a privilege, so treat it as such. Never let it get to your head. Never let it become about you. It is always about your people, what they need to hear to find hope in this world. Thank you so much. I'll now hand everything over to Nick for any final discussion and questions.